The Christmas question, the house glowed with soft golden lights, each bulb carefully placed by my trembling hands as if I could stitch warmth back into a life that had slowly grown cold. The scent of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and sweet desserts filled every corner, wrapping the air in a comforting illusion that tonight, at least, everything was still whole, still a family, still worth believing in. I stood near the dining table for a moment longer than necessary, watching my son Ehsan sit casually in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling endlessly on his phone as laughter escaped his lips at something on the screen. His wife sat beside him, smiling politely, occasionally adjusting her hair or glancing at the decorations I had spent hours arranging, but neither of them truly looked at me, not really, not the way they used to, not the way a son looks at the woman who once meant the entire world to him. And for a brief second, a memory flashed before my eyes, a much younger Ehsan running toward me with scraped knees, tears in his eyes, calling out Ammi, as if I were the only person who could fix his pain, and I had always been. I swallowed hard, pushing the memory away as I took my seat across from him, my hands slightly shaking as I adjusted my dupatta, trying to steady my breath, because tonight I needed to ask him something important, something I had delayed for days, maybe weeks, out of fear of hearing an answer I wasn't ready for. Dinner began with small talk, the kind that fills silence but never reaches the heart. Ehsan talked about business, about opportunities, about how money needs to move to grow, phrases he had picked up somewhere along the way, phrases that sounded impressive but felt distant to me. His wife nodded along, occasionally adding her thoughts, while I quietly served food, making sure their plates were full before even thinking of my own, because habits like these don't disappear easily, they are carved into you over years of loving someone more than yourself. But tonight something inside me refused to stay silent. My chest tightened as I finally gathered the courage, my fingers gripping the edge of the table as I cleared my throat softly. Ehsan, beta, I said, my voice almost lost beneath the clinking of cutlery. He didn't respond at first, just hummed distractedly, still looking at his phone. I forced a small smile, though my heart was racing. I wanted to ask you something. This time he looked up briefly, his expression neutral. Han Ammi? I hesitated, just for a moment, because once I said it, there would be no taking it back, no pretending I didn't need him, no protecting myself from the truth. Did you pay my medical bills? The words felt heavier than they should have, as if they carried not just a question but years of trust, sacrifice, and silent hope. The room fell quiet in a way that made my ears ring. Even the faint music playing in the background seemed to fade. Ehsan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as if I had asked him something inconvenient, something that disrupted his comfort, and in that moment, before he even spoke, I felt a strange fear crawl up my spine. A quiet warning that whatever he was about to say would change something forever. I used the money, Ammi, he said finally, his tone casual, almost indifferent, as if he were talking about something small, something replaceable. My heart skipped, and I blinked, trying to process his words. Used it, I repeated softly, my voice barely steady. For what? He shrugged, picking up his glass of water, taking a slow sip before answering. I invested some of it, and I used some for a trip, he said, glancing at his wife briefly before looking back at me. It was important, important. The word echoed in my mind, louder than anything else, more painful than a shout. I felt my fingers go cold as I stared at him, searching his face for something, guilt, hesitation, even a flicker of concern, but there was nothing, just calm certainty. As if he truly believed what he had done made sense. That money, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay composed, was for my treatment. He sighed slightly, leaning forward now. Ammi, I'll handle it later, okay? You worry too much, worry too much. I almost laughed at that, not out of amusement but disbelief, because how do you explain to someone that a mother's worry isn't a habit, it's a lifetime of putting someone else first? It's the nights you stay awake when they're sick, the dreams you quietly give up so theirs can come true, the silent prayers whispered for their happiness even when your own life is falling apart. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smiled, a small, controlled smile that hid the storm building inside me, because something in me had just shifted, something quiet but powerful, like the moment before a wave crashes against the shore. I looked down at my plate, though I couldn't taste anything anymore, couldn't feel anything except a growing emptiness, and yet beneath that emptiness, there was something else, something new, something I didn't fully understand yet. But it wasn't weakness, it wasn't helplessness, it was clarity, the kind that comes when illusions break, when you finally see things as they are, not as you hoped they would be. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Hassan returned to his phone, his laughter filling the room again as if nothing had happened. His wife joined in, their voices blending into a distant noise that no longer reached me. I sat there quietly, watching them, memorizing the moment not out of love but out of realization, because tonight, on a night meant for warmth and togetherness, I had been given the coldest truth of all, that the son I had given everything to no longer saw me as someone who needed care, only as someone who would always manage somehow, always adjust, always forgive. But as I sat there, my hands now still, my heart strangely calm despite the pain, I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something far more dangerous, self-respect. And as the Christmas lights flickered softly around us, casting gentle shadows on the walls, I realized that this would be the last time I ever asked my son for anything, because from this moment on, I would begin to take back everything I had quietly given away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me for anyone to take for granted again. The silent shift the morning after Christmas arrived quietly, almost deceptively peaceful, as sunlight filtered through the curtains and painted soft patterns across the floor. But something inside me had changed so deeply that even the familiar surroundings felt distant, like I was standing in a life that no longer belonged to me. I woke up before everyone else as I always did, out of habit more than need, and for a few seconds I lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying Hassan's words from the night before, not with tears or anger, but with a strange, unsettling calm, because the pain had already settled into something heavier, something more permanent. I got up slowly, wrapped my shawl around myself, and walked into the kitchen, preparing tea the same way I had done for years, the same careful movements, the same quiet efficiency, but this time there was no warmth behind it, no silent joy in serving, just routine, just function. And when Hassan finally woke up and walked past me, barely glancing in my direction as he grabbed his phone and sat down, I noticed something I had ignored for far too long, the absence of care, not even a simple "How are you feeling, Amy?" Not even a brief moment of concern, and that absence spoke louder than anything he could have said. It confirmed what I had felt the night before, that in his world, I had already been moved to the background, reduced to a presence rather than a person, and strangely, instead of breaking me, that realization steadied me, because once you stop expecting, you stop hurting in the same way, and in that space, something new begins to grow. Over the next few days, I became quieter than usual, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made me invisible. I stopped asking questions, stopped offering opinions, stopped reminding Hassan of things he needed to do. I simply observed. I watched how he spent his money without hesitation, how he talked about future plans that never included me, how easily he assumed that I would always be there, always adjusting, always sacrificing, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not through the eyes of a mother who forgives everything, but through the eyes of someone who had finally stepped outside her own emotions. And what I saw was not cruelty in the obvious sense, but a deeper, more dangerous kind of neglect, the kind that grows slowly, unnoticed, until it becomes normal, until it feels justified, until the person on the receiving end begins to believe they deserve it. But I no longer believed that. One afternoon, while Hassan was out and the house was silent, I picked up my phone and made a call I had been thinking about since that night. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" "It's me," I said softly, and there was a pause before recognition warmed his tone. It was an old friend, someone who had once told me that if I ever needed help, I should not hesitate. A lawyer who had seen parts of my life that even my own family never fully understood. "I need to meet you," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to begin. We met the next day in his office, a place that smelled of paper and decisions, of stories that ended and began with signatures. And as I sat across from him, explaining everything, I felt something shift inside me again, not pain this time, but strength, quiet and deliberate. He listened carefully, his expression serious, asking questions I hadn't allowed myself to consider before, about property ownership, bank accounts, legal rights, things I had ignored for years because I trusted my son completely, because I believed that everything I had would always remain within the safety of our relationship. But now I understood that trust without boundaries is not love, it is vulnerability, and vulnerability, in the wrong hands, becomes loss. Over the next few weeks, I began the process slowly, carefully, gathering documents from drawers I hadn't opened in years, reviewing papers I had once signed without a second thought, and with every piece of information I uncovered, I realized how much of my life I had handed over without securing my own place within it, but instead of regret, I felt determination. Because it wasn't too late, I wasn't too late. I worked quietly, ensuring that nothing alerted Hassan, transferring what was rightfully mine into accounts that only I could access, updating ownership details, securing my assets in ways I had never thought necessary before, and each step felt like reclaiming a part of myself that I had unknowingly given away. There were moments, of course, when doubt tried to creep in, moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh, if I should simply talk to him again, give him another chance to understand, but then I would remember his voice, calm and careless, saying I used the money, and the doubt would disappear, replaced by clarity once more. Because this was not about punishing him, it was about protecting myself, something I should have learned to do long ago. Evenings in the house remained unchanged on the surface. Hassan continued his routine, coming home, talking about his plans, laughing, living his life as if nothing had shifted, and, in a way, for him, nothing had, because the change was happening quietly, beneath everything, in documents and decisions he knew nothing about. But for me, everything was different. I no longer saw the house as a shared space, but as something I needed to redefine. I no longer saw my role as fixed, but as something I could reshape, and that realization was both painful and liberating. One night, as I sat alone in my room, reviewing the final set of papers before signing them, I paused for a moment, my pen hovering over the page, and I thought about the years behind me, the sacrifices, the love, the unwavering belief that my son would always stand beside me the way I had stood beside him. And for a brief second, my eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of acceptance, because I finally understood that love does not guarantee respect, that sacrifice does not ensure gratitude, and that sometimes, the people we give everything to are the ones who teach us the hardest lessons. I signed the papers, one after another, each signature firm, deliberate, final, and when I was done, I set the pen down and leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. Not the kind that comes from comfort, but the kind that comes from taking control, from choosing yourself after years of being chosen last. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized that the woman who had asked her son about her medical bills on Christmas night was no longer the same. She had been hopeful, vulnerable, still waiting to be cared for, but the woman sitting here now was different. She was awake, aware, and ready to face whatever came next, not as someone who depended on others, but as someone who had finally remembered her own worth. And from that moment on, I knew that everything would change, not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily, like a silent shift that no one notices until it has already transformed everything. The fall of illusion months passed after the quiet shifts I had set in motion, and life continued on the surface as if nothing had changed. Hassan went about his days with the same careless confidence, investing in ventures, planning trips, speaking of success and wealth as though nothing in the world could touch him. But beneath that facade, cracks were forming, cracks I had watched grow silently, patiently, like a gardener tending to a seedling that would one day tower over the neglected garden. One evening, he came home visibly tense, his usual laughter absent, his steps hurried, his phone constantly buzzing in his hand. He entered the house and found me sitting calmly in the living room. The room that had once felt like a shared space now belonged to me fully, though he had no idea. Amy, I need to talk, he said, his voice tight, a hint of desperation threading through it. I looked at him, my expression composed, my body relaxed, because I had been waiting for this moment without even realizing it. Yes, I said softly, and he hesitated, running a hand through his hair, looking at the floor, the walls, the decorations, everything except me. That investment, it failed, he blurted out, his voice rising slightly as panic edged his words. I need money. Just temporarily. And in that instant, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because the consequences of his actions had finally reached him. Sorrow because it had to be this way for him to realize anything at all. I took a deep breath, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my voice calm and even. Use your savings, I said simply, and he froze, confusion flickering across his face. I don't have enough, he stammered, panic growing. Your assets? I asked gently, almost teasingly, knowing full well what his next words would be. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room, and finally admitted, I was counting on the house. The word house hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp, and I felt an unfamiliar thrill, not of cruelty, but of justice, a quiet, steady pulse of power that had nothing to do with malice and everything to do with reclaiming what was mine. Hassan, I said softly, deliberately, letting the weight of my words settle. The house isn't yours. He blinked, shock washing over him in waves, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find words that would somehow reverse reality. What do you mean? He finally asked. His voice small, fragile, a stark contrast to the arrogance he had carried for years. I leaned back slightly, keeping my tone gentle but firm. I transferred everything months ago, and I saw the blood drain from his face, the confidence evaporate like mist in the morning sun. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a chair for support. Why would you do that? He whispered, disbelief shaking his voice, and I let a quiet smile touch my lips. Not cruel, not mocking, just calm, measured. Because when I asked you about my medical bills, you showed me exactly where I stand in your life. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, almost tangible, his usual bravado stripped away, replaced by the stark realization that he had miscalculated everything. You chose your priorities, I continued, my voice steady, deliberate. Now I'm choosing mine. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find words that could undo what had already been done, and in that moment, I realized that years of being overlooked, of being taken for granted, had culminated in this quiet, perfect reckoning. He looked around, as if searching for some hidden solution, some loophole, some miracle that could return his world to the way it had been, but there was none. Everything he thought he controlled, everything he assumed was his, had quietly slipped out of his reach, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through careful, patient planning, the kind of strategy born from hurt, resilience, and the realization that if you wait long enough, people reveal themselves fully, and when they do, action becomes inevitable. Hassan sank into a chair, his face pale, hands trembling slightly as he tried to absorb the enormity of the moment. He looked at me then, really looked, for the first time perhaps in years, and I saw a flicker of something new, something I had not seen before, fear, not of me as a person, but of the consequences of his own choices. Amy. He started, voice breaking, but I held up a hand, stopping him gently. It's not about punishment, I said, my tone soft. It's about clarity, about understanding. He swallowed hard, guilt washing over him, his usual excuses failing, his defenses crumbling, and I knew that he would remember this moment forever, not as an act of vengeance, but as a mirror, reflecting every decision he had made and every way he had neglected what truly mattered. For the first time, he understood the weight of his actions, the reality that life does not always grant second chances, that trust once broken is not easily restored, and that love without respect is hollow. I leaned back further, letting the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, allowing him to sit with it, to feel it, to finally see the impact of his choices, and as I watched him shrink under the weight of his own realization, I felt no glee, no malice, only a quiet satisfaction, a peace that comes from having claimed your own power, from having stood firm in the face of betrayal, from having taken control of what had always been yours but was treated as disposable. And in that silence, in that small, ordinary living room, the fall of illusions became complete. Hassan had finally learned that life is neither forgiving nor permanent, that the comfort of assumptions is fleeting, and that sometimes those you believe will always protect you are the very ones who must protect themselves first. And as I watched him struggle with the truth, I understood that this was not the end of our story, but a turning point, a moment where the past and the present collided, leaving him to confront the consequences of his choices and leaving me, at last, free to walk my own path, to take my own steps, and to reclaim the life I had quietly allowed to slip through my fingers for too long. And in that quiet, deliberate, unspoken victory, I realized that true power does not come from loud confrontation, it comes from patience, preparation, and the courage to choose yourself when others refuse to. And that night, as I sat calmly while Hassan wrestled with the reality of his own making, I felt a sense of triumph that was soft, steady, and infinitely more satisfying than any act of revenge could ever be, because the fall of illusion was complete, and I had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and unshakably in control of my own life. The sweet revenge the week following Hassan's revelation passed with an eerie calm, a silence that felt almost sacred, as if the house itself had exhaled, finally acknowledging that the balance had shifted. I moved deliberately, not in haste, but with a clarity I had never felt before, packing only what I truly needed, not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. Each item placed in the small suitcase felt symbolic, a tangible reminder that this time I was leaving not out of despair, not out of defeat, but out of choice. And when I finally stepped out of the house, the space that had once been my prison, I breathed deeply, the air crisp, filled with possibility. It was a small, modest house I had purchased quietly months ago, a place no one would question, no one would intrude upon. The walls were bare at first, but that was how I wanted it, a blank canvas to rebuild, to redefine what life meant for me after years of sacrifice. I walked through each room slowly, savoring the quiet. Each sound, from the soft click of the door to the faint hum of the refrigerator, reminding me that I was here for myself, not anyone else, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly free. Not weighed down by expectations, by unspoken obligations, by the constant ache of being taken for granted. Life became a rhythm of small pleasures, the way sunlight fell across the floor in the morning, the aroma of fresh tea, the gentle brush of wind against the window, simple things I had once overlooked because my attention had always been elsewhere, on Hassan, on his needs, his desires, his mistakes. Now, my attention was entirely mine, and that realization filled me with an unexpected joy. One evening, he came, hesitant, awkward, the confidence that had defined him shattered and replaced by uncertainty. Standing at the door, he looked like a stranger in his own life, a man who had suddenly realized that comfort and privilege are not guarantees but privileges earned and respected. Amy. I made a mistake, he said softly, eyes downcast, voice laced with genuine regret. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the son who had taken me for granted, but as a man who had choices, a man who had learned too late the cost of neglect. Yes, I replied quietly, not harshly, not angrily, just firmly, because this was not about punishment, it was about recognition, about the truth finally landing where it should. He raised his eyes, meeting mine, searching for mercy, understanding, perhaps forgiveness, and I held his gaze steadily. I didn't realize, he murmured, voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile remnants of his pride. I know, I interrupted gently, letting the words settle like soft snow on a cold morning. That's the problem. He flinched slightly at the weight of my statement, the clarity in my tone, the unwavering strength that had replaced the vulnerability he had once assumed would always be there for him. Tears welled in his eyes, but I didn't move to comfort him. This time, the lessons had to be felt, had to be experienced, because words alone could no longer carry their weight. Can you forgive me? He asked, almost a whisper, hesitant, unsure if even I could, and I paused, feeling the surge of years, of pain, of disappointment, of love, of sacrifice, all blending into one clear, steady understanding. Forgiveness isn't the issue, I said softly, my voice calm and even. Understanding is, and I saw it then. The recognition of his actions reflected in his eyes, the dawning awareness that life cannot be taken for granted, that those who love unconditionally are not unlimited in their endurance, that respect and care are not optional but essential. I stepped back, letting him stand with that truth pressing upon him, not to break him, but to teach him, and in that moment, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a sense of completion that I had not known I could achieve, because my revenge, the thing that had simmered quietly inside me since that fateful Christmas night, was not about money, not about status, not about retribution in the traditional sense. It was about reclaiming myself, my life, my worth, and in doing so, teaching him the value of those things. In the days that followed, I arranged my new home with care, each piece of furniture, each decoration, each small detail chosen deliberately, not to impress anyone, not to showcase wealth or taste, but to create a sanctuary where I could exist entirely for myself. Mornings became my own, no longer dictated by the schedules or whims of others. I spent time reading, walking, cooking just for the joy of it, and slowly, deliberately, I healed. The bitterness that had threatened to take root in my heart transformed into quiet strength, a deep satisfaction that could not be shaken by anyone, not even my own son. And though Hassan continued to reach out, awkwardly, tentatively, I responded only when I chose, setting the terms, letting him understand that respect and care must be mutual, that love without recognition is hollow. And over time, I noticed changes in him, small, careful adjustments in his behavior, a hesitancy before spending recklessly, a pause before assuming he could take without consequence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a reflection of the lessons he had been forced to learn. And one night, sitting by my window with a cup of tea, watching the stars shimmer in the dark sky, I realized that the revenge I had taken was not loud, it was not vengeful, it was a quiet reclamation of life, and in that quietness, I had found peace, I had found freedom, I had found myself. The woman who had once asked a question at Christmas dinner, trembling with hope and fear, had become a woman unshakable, confident, and entirely complete. I smiled softly, thinking of Hassan, thinking of the house he no longer controlled, thinking of the way life had taught both of us the same lesson in different ways, and I understood finally that true revenge is not about inflicting pain but about reclaiming dignity, restoring self-worth, and choosing yourself after a lifetime of being overlooked. And in that serene moment, I felt a deep, satisfying triumph, a soft, steady victory that no one could take from me, because it was mine entirely, earned quietly, deliberately, and perfectly.